I'd now like to introduce Nir Kumar. He is an associate partner at Dalberg, based in New Delhi with prior experience in Canada, and he brings a depth of expertise in organizational strategy and transformation. Welcome, Nir.
Amita, thanks so much for the opportunity, and great to hear from the previous speakers and all the great work that they're doing. So I've been asked to sort of speak a little bit about speak a little bit about a can just sorry 1 second. I'm just going to share my screen 1 second. Hopefully you're seeing my screen now, Amita.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, perfect. So I've been asked a little bit to talk a little bit about whether or not artificial intelligence can be truly net positive for the planet, and this is a bit of a reflection on the reports that we had published together with CEW for the India AI Summit. And in that process, we were really speaking to policymakers and countries on what are the possible ways in which they can try and make sure that how AI is used is going to actually create a net positive for the people for people and the planet. And in so doing, we basically had to start with a premise of the fact that AI is not really a choice in terms of adoption. It is a critical infrastructure layer that is already being adopted and integrated into economies, and it is a well-established need for the global South to be able to bring into their economic development cycles and their policies in order for them to continue to stay close to and adhering to the development trajectories that they need, and not have further divergence against the developed country counterparts. And as you can already see, this has been proven out by some similar reports that came through even just last in the last couple of days, where you see the generative AI adoption curve going from very early 40% in 2 years to 53% in within the first 3 years of its life cycle, much faster than any other technology that's come through, including PCUs and in the internet. So the pervasive nature of this is what sort of started the conversation, and said that this was where we have to start at a point of understand of saying that this is going to be a fact, not a choice, not something that we can avoid, even though there are obviously climate risks. So given that premise, the idea was to look at the different solution sets that are available to us and that are already very much viable on how to reduce the possible negative costs, the ways to mitigate the effects of building out the AI stack and carbon intensity of the technology, as well as maximizing the potential benefits. And I think, as Dr. Ganguly and others have said in the previous conversation, it's not a fair comparison to think of just the climate applications and their climate and their carbon intensity, but rather how can we maximize climate applications and solutions that AI drives with the overall effect of AI's use and development, which may be a little bit unfair, but is actually the need of the hour. So with that in mind, it's important to sort of take a little bit of context into place. First and foremost, AI will represent 50% of compute demands by 2030. And this is some of the data that we've seen in other reports, but also a result of our own analysis. And you can see that this is a growth trajectory as related to AI driven demand. But the impact of this is actually quite concentrated in specific regions and grids. And we've seen this in experiences that were again cited by others in the previous panel in the US and other places where prices have skyrocketed for certain communities, or where water and other sort of resources have been more intensely used, and where actors have started to be increasingly crowded out. At the same time, the ability for us to be able to make this development green and sustainable is actually quite limited. Today, 50% of global electricity is for data centers is continues to be driven by fossil fuels. And our ability to actually build out the green and sustainable energy generation is actually quite limited. If you look at not just the generation capacity, but more importantly, the transmission infrastructure takes up to 10 years to get some of this in place, infrastructure in place to make this work. And at the meantime, how data centers are on the march and they're building intensely, and already 43% of them are being built for various reasons in high water stress or very high water stress areas, further exacerbating conditions that were already poor. and in communities that may not have the ability to advocate for themselves and voices to be able to represent the needs and the issues that they're facing. So how do you start dealing with this? And on the one hand, how do you mitigate the negative effects? Our reports basically looked at the full AI stack, which otherwise Jensen Huang calls the AI cake, and sort of try to figure out what are the possible solutions available at each of these different layer points. And as you'll see, what we did in this analysis and in the playbook that you can sort of look at it for more detail is to find specific solutions for each one. So, for example, in the model and use case solution, and I won't go through all of these in detail because we don't have that much time, but there is a real significant possibility, and I think again, as previous panelists were saying, to focus on the life cycle of AI's uses, not just the training, which I think many people mistake as the core carbon driver or emission driver. It is in fact 80 to 90% of the car emissions are driven by the inference over time and the life cycle of use of these large language models. At the same time, there is a very, very strong potential for small AI models, more targeted use cases for these small models to be able to actually achieve the same, if not as accurate results, with far, far fewer compute requirements and far, far more efficient energy consumption. At the same time, and I think throughout what we're seeing in infrastructure governance and ecosystem, is equalizing the share of concentration, share of focus on energy, on water as we are concentrated on energy. Right now, we have strong energy requirements in terms of reporting and standardizations, but we don't have that as much or as strongly for how water is used and how water efficiency is being driven. And this has significant potential. We found, some of the latest and most advanced cooling technologies, for instance, can save up to 30 to 40%. How do you get those put in place either proactively in new builds or retrospectively or retroactively in existing infrastructure is going to be quite a challenge and something that is very much viable if coordination and opportunities are brought together. Similarly, there is a need for grid integration, right? The opportunity is there for the infrastructure to be optimized such that the type of inference, the type of AI activity, and the data centers that you're using those for are matched and batched more appropriately, such that you're using time phasing and peak loads versus idle demand in the right ways to actually equalize some of the stresses on energy systems that we already are facing. And there's proven technology and proven systems that actually get us there. And at the end of the day, it is a matter of making sure that there are strong partnerships in place and strong ecosystem layers, bringing people together that are and breaking down silos that allow the better understanding of resource impact. Throughout our investigation with multiple experts, it's very clear that we're very much at the nascent stage of standardization standards and reporting. And this is going to be an incredibly important place for us to invest and come together in a world that requires, it's a cross-sectoral, cross-border problem and requires us to be able to share some of this data and insight so that we can coordinate across these issues. On the other side, there are three core issues that need to be addressed to yield the greatest benefit. So to raise the upside and maximize the benefits that people feel, and then maximize the number of people that feel this. One is on misprioritization. How to balance the effects, the use cases for impact and feasibility, such that it's not only the market-oriented, profitable solutions that are getting invested in. The misconnection component here is how do we actually get some of the solutions and applications that are climate ready and that will address climate adaptation and resilience out of the research phase and research and development into implementation, from ideation innovation into execution. And there's a significant set of solutions that are actually stuck in this pilot program. And there's been a massive scaling of those pilots, but not enough actual integration. And we can talk a little bit about why that is. And then the third is misallocation. So how are these benefits actually being enjoyed by in an equitable way across societies, across communities, and even between countries? So how is, and this speaks to some of the inherent sort of infrastructure and biases that already exist in both the systems that exist, the data that's available, and who has the control and use of that data, but also then how those benefits democratized and reallocated back such that everyone is being able to benefit and actually those who need it most are seeing the benefits. So this is where we come up a little bit again on the upside to sort of talk a little bit about prioritization, focusing first on articulating the problem and use cases such that we're tackling real world climate risks. We're making sure we're investing in data as a DPI, making it such that, and we recommend that governments and regulators actually look at putting critical climate data sets as digital public infrastructure that everyone can build on, so it's not excludable. It cannot be made proprietary, and it's invested in over time. And at the end of the day, this requires public intervention and public financing. You cannot do it because there's a market failure there that just otherwise is not going to be cost effective for private companies to be able to handle. Third is around deployment and scaling. So how do you create the institutional capacity to actually take pilots into execution? That today we know is very slow. And private sector is leading the way, but public institutions are where we need to invest significant effort and capacity to be able to say, to bring the research into action and say, and make this use cases useful for everyone, such that again the benefits can be redistributed properly. And the example of this, for instance, is that if we are able to do this, it creates a ground truth, a truth tested environment of what data exists, what is appropriate, what is the actual results of monitoring emissions, as opposed to those that are self-reported by private sector companies, and how do you then integrate some of this information into decision making, not just sort of research and information for the sake of information, but actually flows into the decision making process for public institutions, for regulators, for authorities to be able to actually make some decisions on what policies need to be put in place and what incentives and activities need to be taken forward. And the third is around how do we make sure that and safeguard the equity and accountability of impact that this AI technology has. And here, I think Dr. Ganguly also mentioned this, but basically ensuring that the human is in the loop, not just in the upfront sort of the less critical conditions, which are obviously going to, which will require human in the loop in terms of validating and testing, but more critically in crisis situations. We're not making decisions in a black box just because the AI told us to, but especially when there are things to do with early warning systems and flood management and disaster response and various other crises and shocks, which are multiplying every day, and the vulnerabilities are increasing across communities at a rate that's unprecedented. And at the bottom of this or behind all this is a strong, rigorous impact measurement focus on real world outcomes, not just model metrics. So making sure we're looking at what are the actual effects on people's lives, on their livelihoods, on their resilience, and their ability to recover. Those are the types of things that people are really looking forward to making sure this happens in order for the impact to be equitable and accountable. So our reports create these frameworks across create a framework of solutions and actually go into multiple case studies and possible existing solutions that people can leverage, as well as country strategies that people can take up and assess for themselves and in terms of which solutions to deploy. But these basically come up against three different things: responsibility, trust, and ownership. How do we expand AI compute data in ways that respect planetary boundaries? How do we bridge the data divide and method divide such that, particularly in the global south, such that AI is built for and is responsive to local realities? And how do we overcome the pilot trap such that AI systems at scale within public and private institutions and meaningfully support climate adaptation and mitigation for the communities in which the benefits are needed most? You can find out more about both of these reports on the India AI Summit website, but happy to take questions.
Yeah, Nir, I'm just taking a look at the chat box really quick. I don't see any questions. Let me just check my private messages really quick. Um, I don't see any, and know we're slightly over time. So if it's okay with you, we can wrap up.
Yeah,
Neil, thank you so
absolutely.
much for that presentation. It was so, insightful for me. Just even like seeing, and I saw a few comments from some of our speakers saying that they found them very insightful as well. So thank you so much.